Hi, I'm Brent Butterworth, and I'm here to give you a demonstration of Bluetooth latency. Latency is something that happens in all digital audio processing, where the audio signal lags behind by a fraction of a second. Now, this is not a problem if you're just listening to music, because you don't care if you hit the little button on your iPhone and the music starts playing a fifth of a second later, and it sounds the same, doesn't matter. But once you introduce video into it, in the video games or YouTube videos, it gets to be a big problem because the actor's lips will tend to be out of sync with the sound. So let's demonstrate that. We're looking at right now 0 latency. So my lips are in sync, I hope. And you can see if I pull out this clave, that the clave should be in sync. The picture of the clave should be in sync with the sound. Now, let's go to 33 milliseconds latency. This is about what you get with the aptX low latency codec. Now, you might be able to see a difference in the lip sync, but maybe not. This is only about 1 frame of difference, and here again is the clave. So, now, let's go up to 100 milliseconds of latency. This is about what you get with the standard aptX codec, which is found in a lot of headphones these days. So you can see what my lip sync is like. Here's the clave. Judge for yourself. Now let's go to 200 milliseconds of latency. This is what you get if you just go buy a standard set of Bluetooth headphones, which use the SBC codec and play them off of an iPhone or an Android or something like that. Now, you can see that you may have noticed that my lips are starting to go ahead of the sound that's coming out of my mouth, which is a problem. And let's try the clave again. You may notice that it doesn't sync up with the picture. Now, let's push it to the limit. Let's go to 300 milliseconds of latency. Now that is what you probably get if you had some kind of other audio processing on top of the Bluetooth. Like let's say if you had a Dolby Digital feed, which is about 50 milliseconds of latency typically, going into the Bluetooth. So you're adding another 200 to 250 milliseconds of latency. This is a worst case situation, but it could happen. Now, since we're at 300, you can already start to see that my lips are pretty far out of sync with the picture, and it's starting to look like one of those old Japanese monster movies that were badly dubbed into English. To wit, Godzilla is like a living nuclear weapon destined to roam the earth forever. Indestructible. So, here's the clave. Should be hopelessly out of sync by now. And that's it. That's your demonstration of Bluetooth latency. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.
Well, as Rob said, I'm Bobby Osinski, and that was a promotional part of the show. These are some of the books that I've, just some of them. Anybody have some? I hope you do.
Sure do.
Very cool. And I also do a couple of blogs every day. One's a music production blog, one's a music industry blog, and a podcast every week that has some movers and shakers. I actually had Garth on last year, who was very cool. So let's talk about room acoustics. First of all, let me ask you guys, who has a home studio? And if you don't, what are you waiting for? Those of you who have home studios, are you happy with it? You happy with the sound you're getting? Okay, mostly no. Okay. Does anybody have problems with too much sound going out of the studio and bothering people? Yeah, of course. How about sound coming in that's bothering you? Yeah, of course. Well, that's the way it works. Well, most of the time, people look at room acoustics as this black magic, this mystery that's happening. And yeah, there's some of that, but really, it's more common sense. And I'm going to show you today, hopefully demystifying it a little bit, and just show you some of the ways that you can actually take any room and make it sound better. Make it sound better. Isolation and making it sound better are two different things, so that's what we're going to get into right now. So first of all, did this ever happen to you? Where I just asked, where suddenly people would say, my neighbors are bugging me because I'm bothering them. It could maybe be family members because you're in your bedroom. All that stuff. Well, let's talk about the first part of acoustics. There's really two. The first one is isolation, and the second one is acoustic treatment. So let's talk about isolation first. This is an anechoic chamber. Anybody ever been in an anechoic chamber? It's the weirdest thing because you walk in and there is no sound, literally nothing. You can hear the blood flowing through your veins. You can hear your heart beating so loud, you think it's huge. And it's scary, actually, and it's no fun. But that being said, it is totally silent, totally. And we think that's what we want, but it really isn't. So let me talk about the things that don't work when it comes to isolation before we get into the things that do work. Now, people will do these things all the time, thinking that they're making the room better, more isolated. Tell me if you've seen this before. Egg crates. Anybody ever see egg crates on the wall? Totally useless. This was a big thing in the 60s and the 70s for some reason. Everybody thought, 50s, 60s, everybody thought the egg crates are going to work. Well, you get a little bit of diffusion with it, so it might help the sound that way. But it's hard to find enough of them, first of all. Second of all, they're made out of paper, so it's a big fire hazard. And third of all, it doesn't do anything, so that's no good. Here's the next thing, mattresses. I'll get a whole bunch of mattresses and I'll put them on the wall, and that's going to help. Nah. Mattresses will help your acoustic treatment a little bit, but doesn't help the isolation at all. And not only that, they're smelly after a while, and they're really good places for like mice to live in, so that's no good either. And again, how do you find enough of them? And then they're so big that they really cut down on the amount of room that you have, so that doesn't work either. Carpet. Boy, I see this a lot. You go into a room, people have carpet all over everything. Doesn't help your isolation, not a bit. Might help the acoustics a little bit, so you won't have as many reflections, so that's kind of cool. But again, carpet gets smelly, and usually people don't buy new carpet that they use. They're using used carpet, so it doesn't smell so good. And it really doesn't help you at all. Here's another one, foam rubber. Thought is, wait a second, foam rubber, this should work. Fire hazard, again, no good. Helps a little on the acoustics, keeps the reflections down. Doesn't do anything for your isolation. The neighbors are still going to be complaining. Rubber, okay, we'll get this foam rubber, maybe if we compress it, well, it won't take as much space. Yeah, but it doesn't really work for isolation. Again, neighbors are going to be really upset with you. Plywood panels. Well, this kind of works, actually. This is something that is going in the right direction. The problem is plywood panels are usually like an 1/8 inch. So they're not really big, and you really have to glue them and screw them to make them work. Otherwise, they flap with all the sound, and they just make these awful noises. So no good there either. And not only that, you have to have a lot of them to really help your isolation. Particle board, again, moving in the right direction. Yeah, this is big, heavy stuff that actually works pretty well in terms of giving you some isolation. The big problem with particle board is the fact that it's heavy, it's kind of expensive. You can do far better off in other ways to really get you where you need to go with this, which we'll go over in a little bit. And then finally, well, no, it's not finally, next to last, fiberglass insulation. Okay, so now we're thinking, wait a second, so I know fiberglass is a big deal for insulation. What if we just put some of that in the wall? What do you think? Nah, doesn't work. First of all, it's kind of a health hazard. You don't want to breathe those fibers in. Second of all, you don't want them to scratch your skin, so that's no good. And third of all, it doesn't really do anything when it comes to isolation. One more time. Helps the reflections, That's about it. So no good. And then finally, acoustic foam. How many of you have used acoustic foam in your houses? Okay. How many have seen acoustic foam in studios? Yeah, that's a shame. Acoustic foam is kind of like the worst stuff ever. Here's why. It does nothing for your isolation. Zero. Because here's the problem with isolation. It's always the low frequencies that are bugging people. It's not the high frequencies. Well, this does nothing for anything below 1,000 cycles. Zero. So that's no good. Second of all, if you don't buy the right stuff, it's a fire hazard. One more time. Third of all, it kind of sort of helps the acoustics, but you need a whole lot of it, which can get expensive. And again, it only works 1,000 cycles and above. It doesn't do anything for your low frequencies. Low frequencies are what we're trying to get rid of. So if you take a look at this list here, there's a lot that doesn't work. What works then? This is what works. And this is the first principle. Mass equals isolation. There's no way around it. You need a lot of mass to make this work. You need brick, you need cinder block, you need anything that's big, and the more of it, the better it works. And the big problem with that is it's expensive to buy. And not only that, the labor is expensive, and probably you just can't do it. You can't do it in a small room. This is expensive. So let me show you how isolation actually works. So if you look on, when we see in the bottom it says STC. STC is kind of like the acoustic equivalent of decibels. So 33 kind of means that your walls at home, just think of your walls at home. One room of the other. You're in one bedroom, you have people in the other bedroom. You can probably hear the conversation pretty well at STC 33. So all that is drywall on both walls. That's it. There's nothing in between. If we go to B over here, if we add insulation, and this is just normal fiberglass insulation, well, that helps. That gives us 3 dB of more isolation. So now, instead of hearing distinctly the conversation on the other side of the wall, we're hearing this. You're still hearing it, but it's not quite as distinct. So that didn't help us a whole bunch. Now, you hear the whole thing about a room inside of a room, right? So everybody thinks that that's kind of the ideal. It isn't. You have to know how to do it. So if we go to C, we build 2 walls, 2 distinct walls. But we only get 4 dB more. So now what happens is, okay, now we won't hear this anymore, but if there's somebody pounding on a kick drum, we're going to hear it very distinctly. And if somebody's playing loud, we're going to hear it. So that didn't really help us, having a wall and then another wall. Now, look what happens when we go to D. D, we actually take one of those walls down, one of those inner wall panels down, and it jumped 10 dB. And when we go to E, we took both of them down. So now what we have is 2 outside walls, the insulation, and then a big airspace. This is when it gets good. And this is the whole secret here. We have to have that airspace to make it work. When we go to F, this is really good. Now, this is great isolation, and what we've done is we've taken that inner wall and we've put that extra layer on the outside. So now instead of having one piece of an outside layer, now we have 2. So this is what you see in most studios. Number F, and F is good. F means we have really good isolation. It's not a wall inside of a wall. It's basically a wall, airspace, and then a wall. This is the whole secret, that airspace. It's a big deal. So this is what we see in most studios. Does this make sense? You kind of get the idea how this is working here to make this work. Now, suddenly, if we have to do this, that means we've really cut down on the amount of room that we had. So now instead of a 10 by 10 room, now what we're getting is an 8 by 8 room. We've cut a lot of space out in order to get it. So that's one of the problems that we have. Not only that, what we had to do is we had to do a lot of construction, which maybe you don't want to do because it's expensive. But this is the way it works for isolation. All right. Here's principle number 2. We see this aquarium here. Think of sound exactly like water. Sound is like water. So what that means is, if you think about this room, for instance, what would happen if we filled it up with water? What do you think? It would probably leak out certain places, right? It would leak out usually around outlets, for instance, AC outlets. There might be some in between sheets of plasterboard. There'd be a space. It would go out of there. Around the door, it would leave. Around windows. Any place there's an airspace, bad. That means that even though you've built that second wall and you have what should be STC 63, if you have any little airspace, you've defeated the whole thing. Done, gone. The whole secret is you have to treat it like an aquarium. You have to seal everything up so there's no way that sound is ever going to leak out. So, this is what we use. If you take notice, the wall outlet, there's some acoustic putty, special putty, that we put around outlets, that we put around jack plates, for instance. Anything like that, we would have to put this acoustic putty around it. And that would basically seal it up. Now, the other thing we do is we would use something called green glue. So if you're going to put another piece of plasterboard on top of the first one that you have, you use this green glue, and then you screw everything down. So what you're going to do is glue it and screw it, and basically everything is not going to move once you put it on, so it's not going to vibrate or flap or anything. And then in the bottom, this is something that we like to use. It's SC175. And what that is, it's a special caulk. And that will caulk in between anything else that you don't have putty on. So for instance, you have 2 pieces of plasterboard side by side, or like this, one or the other. And in between the seam, that's where we'd put it. And the reason why we use this instead of regular caulk that you can go to Home Depot and get, this lasts for like 10 years. The stuff that you get at Home Depot might only last for 2 or 3 before it starts to break down. So that's why we kind of spend the extra money and go with that. But now, see what we're doing here, we're trying to seal this room up, which can be a problem. Okay, so we seal the room up, and it's really tight, and there's nothing getting in, there's nothing getting out. What happens then? Suffocate? Yeah, that's kind of what happens, because now we have to think about this, HVAC. Now we have to exchange the air in the room, because you get 4 musicians, and you get an engineer and producer, and all of a sudden, there's no place for that air to go. So you have to find a way to exchange it. Okay, this is where it gets expensive. So if you think it was expensive before, now it really gets bad. Because you can't just hire anybody, an air conditioning guy, to come in and do this. Why? Well, acoustics, that's why. Because usually what they'll do is they'll have some straight runs on the air conditioning coming in, and it comes in and it goes down like that. And then there's an exchange, does the same thing. Well, guess what? All of a sudden you hear the air conditioning. Anybody ever in a studio where you turn the air conditioning on, you can hear it, gets loud? No good. So that's the first thing that's not good with it. The second thing is, well, guess what? It's a good way for the sound to come in as well and go back out. So when you have somebody that's really good at this, that knows how to do it, what they do is they put a series of bends in the ductwork. So they put these bends in. So first of all, it traps the acoustic-wise, it traps the sound so it never really gets in or out. That's good. And it also keeps the airflow down. So you turn the air conditioning on, you don't hear it. But guess what? Expensive. This is really expensive. And usually you need a pretty, not this big, but you need a pretty big air conditioning unit. Want to know the cheap way to do it? I know you do.
Oh, yes.
Okay, this is something called a mini split. And I guarantee if you guys are going to build a studio, this is the way you want to go. You know why? Because it's in two pieces. There's an air compressor that sits outside that makes all the noise, and then there's a second piece that does all the duct work. And basically all you need is one small about a half-inch pipe. Actually, there's two of them. And so one comes from the compressor, and you snake it through and you connect it to that, and the other one basically takes any of the condensation and drips it outside. These are fairly inexpensive. They're about $5,000 compared to about $50,000 you're talking about on regular HVAC system. So these are really expensive. They give you both heat, air exchange, and cool. You can get them in all different sizes. And not only that, you can go down to Home Depot, buy one of these things, and do it yourself, and put it in yourself. It's that easy if you're a little handy. So just remember that, a mini split. And the other cool thing, they also have a remote, very similar to this. And you do everything on the remote. So you set I want to turn it up, set the temperature, let's set it on high, whatever. So it's all with the remote. Very cool. And this is kind of the way to go for small studios. So that's the mini split. So let's talk about the realities of isolation. They're not pretty. It's expensive. Anytime you want to add isolation, it's going to be a lot. It costs a lot in material. It costs a lot in labor. Not good. You have another problem. You're going to need permits to do this stuff. It's major construction. So it costs money to get the permit. Usually you need somebody, an expediter, put it together, because otherwise you'll spend months just waiting to get the permit cleared. So this is not something you can go into lightly. Third thing, there's a lot of hidden costs. What are the hidden costs? Okay, the air conditioning is one thing, where you just don't think about it usually. The second thing is there's always a problem when you're doing this, when you're adding something. For instance, let's put another wall in here. Let's really isolate this. Oh, wait a second, there's all that extra weight on the floor. Can it handle it? Oh, now we need a structural engineer to come in and do the measurements. So there's all sorts of things like that. Or it might be, oh, wait a second, the room is a little different. It's not square after all, it's a little offset. Oh, that's going to change how we do everything. Or maybe there's a funny little angle you have. There's all these crazy things that always pop up. So this is not something to be taken lightly at all. Next thing. Okay, usually you're renting a place, right? Got to get permission before you do something like that. Major construction. A lot of landlords say, I don't think so, because when you leave, I'm going to have to tear all this stuff down. So that doesn't work a lot of times. If you own the house, let's say you own the facility, well, the resale value might go down. Decide to sell, and you think, I got a studio. Everybody wants one of those. Well, not quite. And you'll have the realtor come in and say, you know what, if you tear that out, I think it'll be better. Get more money. So these are some of the problems. Here are some things you can improve, though. There are two places that can make a huge improvement on any studio. Could be your bedroom, doesn't matter. The doors and the windows. And I guarantee if you just look at these two things, you're going to find your isolation is going to be so much better. And it won't cost too much at all. So here's what we do. First thing, on the door. If you can afford it, you replace the door. Because most doors are hollow. You replace it with a solid core door. Might cost you $200 or $300 for that. Okay, you don't want to go that much, you can't afford it. Here's some other things that you can do. First thing is, you just go to Home Depot and you get some weather stripping. $2 worth, right? And you put the weather stripping all around the inside of where the door actually closes. So you put the stuff up, you close the door, and then you get somebody on the other side to take a flashlight and go around the perimeter of it while you're standing on the other side in a closed door. If you can see this light anywhere, it's not working. You have to readjust the weather stripping. So the whole idea, it's the same thing. We go back to the aquarium idea. You don't want to have any kind of holes or anything in there, or else the sound is going to leak out. But this stuff works like magic. It costs hardly anything. You can put it up yourself, and it makes a big difference. That's only part of it, because you have the perimeter of the door, but you don't have the bottom. And most of the time, the door doesn't go all the way down to the bottom, or if it does, there's a quarter of an inch or something on the bottom so it doesn't scrape. So again, the sound is leaking out underneath the door. So here's what we need. We need a door sweep or a transom seal, or if we go to the next one, we do this. We get a door jamb. Unfortunately, it's spelled wrong, but and it's really simple. Again, we go to Home Depot, we pay $5, and we put this in, and next thing it does, it just seals that door. It seals the bottom of the door. Didn't cost anything, and guess what? You just really upped your game in terms of isolation. This is kind of what it looks like. Nope. This is what it looks like otherwise. So you can see just a rubber seal on the bottom. So now we fix the door. Now what do we do? For the window, we go to Home Depot. It's a little more expensive, and we say, I want a 1/4 inch sheet, or 1/8 inch even, of Lexan. Lexan is a brand name, but it could be anything. There's 4 or 5 different names for the same thing. It's a sheet of polycarbonate. And what you're going to do is you're going to go outside. You could do it inside too, it doesn't matter. And you're going to take your weather stripping and you're going to go around the window one more time. Put it all around the window. Then you take this sheet of Lexan, you put it on top, you screw it on, and now, guess what you just did? You added an extra little space between your real window and this new window that you put on top. You can still see outside, you can still get the nice sunshine, but guess what? It just took your isolation and it upped it a whole bunch. Now, if you're going to do this the right way, you'd probably just seal up the whole window. I don't like that personally, because I like to have, if I can't smell the fresh air, at least I like to see it. So this works pretty well. Now, the sheets of Lexan will probably cost you about $50. They're not terribly cheap, but they're not real expensive in the grand scheme of things. But guess what? For not a whole lot of money, what you just did is you made your room a whole lot better. A whole lot. Is it going to be perfect? No, not at all. It's still going to be seeping through the walls. That's still going to happen. But you're going to find that it's going to be better than it was before, and you didn't spend a whole lot of dough. Make sense? So these are the problems that we have when it comes to isolation. It's just not easy to overcome. What we can do, though, is we can make our studio sound better. And again, that doesn't cost much at all. So let's go look at that. Let me give you 5 tips that will cost you no money, 0. It's probably these are probably things that you might be doing already, and maybe not. Okay, here's the first thing. So you can see there's our desk, and this could be a regular console, or it could be just our computer. Doesn't matter. But here's the first thing we got to do. Move those speakers at least a foot to 1.5 feet away, 12 to 18 inches away from the wall. Anybody do this already? You should. Makes a big difference. You know why? When your speaker's next to the wall, say this is the wall and our speaker's right next to it, what we're getting is we're getting the low frequencies, especially, that are going around, they're bouncing off. But there's a time delay that's happening. So you have your low frequency coming out here, and then you're having others that bounce off and come out over here, and you're getting some cancellation. When you move it away, you have fewer of those happening. So all of a sudden your bass just tightens up. It sounds a little better. So that's the first thing, real easy. Second thing, this is a problem that we all have. You're going to set something up in a room and there feels like the right place. Everything's going to fit right here. But guess what? The wall is right here, this wall, and the other wall is way over there. So if I'm setting up right here, notice how much closer this wall is over here. No good. If you want it to sound really good, you do what most studios do. You have it right in the middle of the room. So your listening position is exactly in the center. So it's the same amount to each wall. Anybody do that? Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. Okay, number 3. Set up lengthwise. Most rooms are not square, thank God, because the worst acoustic environment you can have is square. Absolutely the worst. If you have a 10 by 10 by 10 room, you're never going to make it sound good, ever. Ever. And without getting into any math, that's the worst thing that can have is a square room. So, but you'll find there are very few square rooms. Most of them are a little longer than they are wide, which is good for us because what we want to do is we want to set up lengthwise. So the long part, I want to set up this way. Who does that? Oh, good, some of you, yeah. Number 4, decouple your monitors. And really all that means is you get some acoustic foam and you can get, there's all sorts of, Prime Acoustic makes some, but you can get some for cheaper than that, 20 bucks for 2 speakers. And just decouple those monitors. Anybody use those? Okay, a few of you. What you'll find is your bass will get more defined. It'll get a little punchier. The reason why, when you put your speaker on a flat surface like this, on your desk where your computer is, you're hearing 2 different things. You're getting, first of all, the direct sound from the speaker, but it's also flowing through and vibrating your desk. And you're getting some of it by osmosis. You can feel it coming up. So there's these cancellations that are happening. It just sounds muddy. You isolate your monitors and all of a sudden that goes away and it just sounds a little bit cleaner and a little more punchier. Okay, next thing, set your monitors up correctly. I see this way too much. So in other words, whatever you have the settings on the one speaker, make sure they're exactly the same on the other. And take care of this because too many times you take them out of the box, you set them up, oh, they sound good, leave them there without even looking too hard at what those settings are. Just go back and check your monitors to make sure that the settings are exactly the same. And sometimes there's not very much that you can set on them. Maybe the level, that's about it. In other cases like these Yamahas here, you know, there's a lot. There's a lot of well, they call it room control. Make sure they're set up the same way. That's all. For better or for worse. Anybody do that? I hope you all do. Okay, good. So those are the 5 things. It doesn't cost you any money, and you'll find it'll make a big difference. We're not done there, though. Oh, here's another thing. Take notice of the position of the tweeters. Is this good or bad? They're to the inside. Good or bad? Yeah, it's generally bad to have the tweeters on the inside. There's 2 reasons. First of all, what will happen is your stereo field will be a lot more narrow. And the second thing is you'll get some interaction between those tweeters. So they might not actually sound that good with the cancellations that you have. Most of the time, you want the tweeters to the outside. I say most of the time because there are occasions when you might flip that around, but most of the time, tweeters on the outside. The other thing is, do you know how wide to set them up and how to angle them? Anybody have an idea how to do that? Yeah? Tell me. Okay, yeah, you're onto it there, but you're not thinking of, so there's an equilateral triangle, right? So you have them set up, coming at your ears, but really, you want to aim for behind your head. That's kind of a little secret. What will happen is it will sound better because you'll have a wider stereo field. It's just aim for a little behind your head, and it works better. Okay. So that's the no dollar setup. Keep your monitors away from the wall. Try to stay equidistant from each side wall so your listening setup is right in the middle of the room. Set up lengthwise in the room if you can. Decouple your monitors. And set your monitors up the same way on each side. Make sense? It doesn't cost anything for this stuff, and it will make a difference. It will. So now there's a couple of things that we have happened here. The first thing is you learned how to give yourself at least some isolation with your doors and windows. You learned why you don't, it's very difficult to get isolation. No easy way to do it. And now we talked about some easy setup, just normal setup ways in our listening environment that will really fix things. Okay, so what I promised at the beginning is making your room sound better for $150 or less. So far, we're at about the about $60 level, but let me take you to $150. So let's improve the sound of your room, and you can see this room is doing it all wrong, first of all, with the, well, actually, I can't say it's all wrong. I wouldn't use acoustic foam, but what's right about this room? Can anybody tell me? Okay, that helps. But what else do you notice?
The monitors look like they're set up well. They're like equidistant. They're in the right distance in the room, kind of symmetrically.
Could be, but there's something else. I'll show you that right now. The key to a good sounding room is what they call an RFZ, reflection-free zone. So what this is acoustic panels on both your sides, where you're sitting, and one over the top. Everybody forgets about the one on the top. Now take notice what we have here, just on top of you guys. We have a cloud. This is, so what we'd be doing, and also take notice, I'm thinking that this is probably there's a studio setup in here before, and the listening area is right here. This was part of your RFZ. If you look in the back, there's a acoustic panel, and there was probably one over here as well at one point in time, I bet. Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to keep those reflections down on our sides and on the top. We don't much care about the floor. Can anybody tell me why? Okay, let's go again. Let me ask you another floor question. What should we have on the floor? What's ideal?
Concrete, wood.
Concrete and wood. What else?
Carpet.
Okay, carpet. Honestly, it doesn't matter. But what we don't want to do is make it too dead. The reason why, when we begin to make the floor dead and part of the RFZ, it sounds funny to us because we take our audio cues from the reflections off the floor. So if suddenly there's no reflections off the floor, we begin to think, oh, this room is way dead. There's something wrong here. So that's why we don't much care about the floor. It's okay if it, and as a matter of fact, you'll see most of the time there'll be a parquet floor or something around the console. Part of that is so that the chairs move pretty easily, but it really doesn't matter what's down there. It does matter what's on the side. A big deal, great deal. And the ceiling, and that's the one that everybody forgets. So that's what we're trying to do. Now if we go back to this here, this one, take notice there's an RFZ, or at least we can see part of it. So at least we have treatment on both sides. How do we set this up? Well, the easy way is it's almost a two-person job, but you can do it with one person. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that wherever the speaker is looking in the room, that's where it's soft. So in other words, we'll take like a laser pointer or something and put it on top of the speaker, like here where the tweeter is, and see where it's hitting on the wall. And we'll go, okay, that's where it has to be soft. That's the easy way. Another way to do it would be to put a mirror, a little mirror here, and then get a flashlight or a laser pointer. And then hit it from here. And then look and see, wherever you can see in the mirror, as you walk along, you go, okay, I can still see it, I can still see it, I can still see it. Wherever you can still see the reflection, that's where you make it soft on the wall. But basically, you want it wide enough that, you know, it's near your ears and a little before and a little against, a little after. And on top, the same amount. So that's your RFZ. How do we do this? We do it with acoustic panels. And if we look on the side here, these are acoustic panels. You can make them yourself, or you can buy them. You don't need a lot of them, but they're fairly easy to make. If you go on my website, on my YouTube site, there's actually video on how to do this. But you'll make a frame, and you'll put the acoustic material on it, and you'll cover it with a fabric. Burlap is cheap, any kind of fabric. The only secret there is, I mean, you can take tablecloths and bedspreads. That works too. Here's the secret though. If you can blow through it and feel your breath on the other side, then it works. Because acoustic-wise, it works. If you blow through it and you don't feel much on the other side, you have to try find another material. But that's real simple, real easy. So again, this is what we're going to do. What's the material? Well, this has been used in studios forever and ever. It's Owens Corning 703. And again, this has been a standard. Every studio can think of has used this. It comes, and what it is compressed fiberglass. So you know the fiberglass that usually goes in walls or in your attic or whatever, it's compressed into a sheet. And that's why it works so well. And the good thing about this is it works down in the lower frequencies. It doesn't go like below 100 cycles, but it goes pretty low. So that's why it works. And you can get it in different sizes. You can get it 1 inch, 2 inch, 4 inch. It comes standard in 2x4 sheets, which is why all the panels are usually about 2x4. And then it's fairly easy to work with, but you have the same problems where if you touch it, you know, you can get a rash. If it becomes unbundled, you don't want to breathe that stuff in. So, you know, you're wearing a mask when you're doing this. So that's why people don't like to use this so much anymore. Here's a typical studio where it's being put together here. And you can see it's just these pieces of 703. And then what they'll do is they'll put fabric over the top. That's most of the studios you see. That's how this works. So this is a permanent installation. When we make these panels, it's semi-permanent because we can take them wherever we want. That's the cool part. You make these things, it doesn't cost you any money, and when you're ready to move, you just pull them down and go someplace else. That's why it's cool. You don't even have to make them. There's a lot of companies that make them now, but it's cheaper if you do it. Here's a better solution. This is called rock wool. Have you heard of rock wool? What it is, it's an artificial spun rock, but it's in threads, and then the threads are pressed together. The good part about this is it actually works better than 703. It goes a little lower. It's easier to work with, and there's no health hazard. You can play with it all day long, no problem. Now, and there's two types, AFB and Rockboard 60. Rockboard 60 is what we use in the studios, but you'll never find it at Home Depot. And you won't find 703 either. So don't go down there trying to get it. They do not stock this stuff. Where do you go? Well, what you want to find a company that does industrial insulation, that do furnaces and stuff like that. This is what they use a lot of times, both Rockboard and 703. So it's easy to get there. Now, Home Depot, I don't know if you have Lowe's up here. You have Lowe's? Yeah, okay. They're starting to carry Roxol AFB. It's called AFB. Roxol is the main company. I think they're Canadian too. They're the main company that makes rock wool. And AFB works about the same as Rockboard 60. The problem is Rockboard 60 is really dense. And if we go to the next slide, basically you get a big knife and you can just cut it up as much as you want. It's very easy to go through. You'll never be able to do that with OC703. And Rockboard works really well. AFB is a little bit harder. It clumps a little bit. It'll fall apart. Still works great though. Now, I wrote a book on acoustics, which you'll see at the end here, and my partner, my writing partner, who's also a great engineer, Dennis Moody, this is what he uses that you can find anywhere. It's basically carpet liner. It's the stuff that goes underneath the carpet. And this is what he uses. So and you can find this just about everywhere. So you'll take this stuff, you'll do the same thing, you'll put it up, you'll put some fabric over it, boom, you got it. I don't like this as much, but it's easy to get and it's fairly cheap. So that's another kind of off-the-wall thing that you can do. So, how do you do this? Well, it's easy. Again, there's a video. If you go to my YouTube site, and I'll give you what that site is at the end here, there's a video that you can look at that will show you step by step it goes through making this. Lynda.com, I did a course on acoustics as well, and same thing there. So basically what we'll do is we'll just make a frame, and we'll just go and we'll get the cheapest wood we can, as long as it's straight, cheapest pine you can get. Go to Home Depot, and even have them cut it for you if you want. And just put some brackets in around the edges, screw them together, and you can do one of two things. You can set the rock wool or the OC703 on top. You can put it inside the frame, doesn't matter. Then you just cover it up with your fabric, staple it together, done. It takes no time to do this, and it doesn't take a lot of money. How much does it, let's go back to the rock wool. How much does it cost? I'm sure you're saying. These come in packages. Again, they're usually 2x4s. Package of 6 or 8 sheets. And you can buy each package for, depending on, well, the last time I bought it was $35 US a package. So it doesn't cost a whole lot of dough. It doesn't cost a lot for the wood that you're going to buy. It doesn't cost a lot for the brackets. And it doesn't cost a lot for the fabric. You can do this really cheaply. You can make your own RFZ, and guess what? Your room improves. The sound of your room improves a whole lot right away. Right away. Because that's basically what any studio does. Now, like I said, you can buy frames from a number of, or buy acoustic panels from a number of places. It'll cost you 2 to 3 times as much. Sometimes it's worth it if you don't feel handy, you don't feel like putting them together yourself, spending the time. Might be worth it. But there must be a dozen different places online where you can buy them. You don't really want to buy them far away and have them shipped. There's probably somebody local that does it, you know, or fairly local that will do it, that will cost you a whole lot less money. So now we have the side walls, we have the ceiling, we talked about the floor. Tell me, what is the next part of a room that we have to look at, that we have to worry about? Okay, we have the corners. Where else? The back. Where else? The front wall, too. But the most important is going to be the rear wall. Now, if you've been in studios, you've probably seen something like this in the rear wall. And what this is, it's called a diffuser. So any sound that kind of misses your ears hits the back wall, and you don't want it bouncing back in your ears. Don't want any bounce. So what the diffuser does, it shifts it off a couple different ways. Like this, for instance, is what they call a 2D diffuser. So it splays it off this way to the sides. There's something called a 3D diffuser. Usually these are more expensive on the right, and that'll shift it off up and down and to the sides. That works a little better, much more expensive to do. Diffusers are expensive if you're going to buy them. But I get a trick for you that works every time. That you probably have one of these in your house. It's called a bookshelf. You get a bookshelf, you put it in your rear wall, and just fill it up with random things. Random. Especially books. Books are really good because they do a couple different things. They act as diffusers, and they also absorb some of the sound that's coming this way. But put other objects up because it's a diffuser. It diffuses all the sound up. It costs you no money, or a little money to buy the bookshelf if you have to buy one. Works like gangbusters. One of the best studios that I've ever been in is Linda Perry's. You know Linda Perry, the producer? I'm sure you know. I mean, she's done Pink and Courtney Love, and she's had a lot of hits. And she has one of the best studios in LA. Or had it, she just sold it. So picture a room with, well, these are about 20-foot high ceilings, 18 maybe. Higher than this, a room that's basically 4 times longer. Big. This is the recording room. Big. One whole side is filled with the top to bottom bookshelf. And it sounds amazing. It sounds amazing. This is in the tracking room. Now, what's also interesting is she has a fetish for great gear as well. So now picture one of the walls, floor to ceiling, with cubicles like this, but filled with drums. So 50 snare drums that are all hand-picked, hand-tuned, anything you can think of. Kick drums, same thing. Toms, same thing. Cymbals, same thing. And then over in one corner, it's every amplifier you've ever thought of that you might want to use. But the most perfect one you've ever seen. Last I counted, it was something like 60-some amps, guitar bass amps. And then in front of the control room window, gee, I have a picture, I should put it in here. It was every guitar and bass vintage instrument you've ever thought of. And again, I stopped counting at 75 one day. 75 instruments, best of everything. And then you go into another room and it's the same thing with keyboards. Mellotrons, Mini Moogs, I mean, the real thing. Pretty fantastic. You don't see many studios like that. But the big thing, what I was getting to, is the bookshelf. So this is something that's really cheap and really easy that anybody can do.
And sorry, this person that had all of this equipment had a bookshelf as her back rear wall?
No, it was actually, for her, it was a sidewall. Okay. Yeah. But it was 25 foot high, floor to ceiling, and it went the length, which was maybe 40 feet. It's huge. And it was filled mostly with books. Yeah, Linda Perry, look her up. She's had a lot of hits, as a writer and a producer. Anyway, okay, so we talked about everything but the corners. Bass traps. Why do we want bass traps?
It's like reflects in the corners.
Corners are the worst offenders. And when we think of corners, we think of this corner, that, right? When we think of a corner, there's more corners. This is a corner. That's a corner. That's a corner. So if we're going to do it right, what we do is we put a bass trap where we put an acoustic panel in all of the corners, which looks pretty bad and isn't necessary as it turns out. The other thing that's interesting, the smaller the room, the more bass traps we could use. Because usually, the smaller the room, the more trouble we have with lower frequencies. And what I mean more trouble is there's bad reflections that will happen. So as you walk in a room, and you've probably all experienced this, you walk in the room and you go one place and the bass is booming, and you walk another few steps and it disappears. Well, that's because you got some terrible reflections that are going on. And when we put bass traps together, that kind of gets rid of that, or at least it smooths it out a little bit. So there's a couple different types of bass traps. If you get an acoustician in, what he'll probably do is he'll measure where those problems are. He'll figure out the exact frequency, and he'll build a bass trap that's tuned to that frequency. Usually it's something called a Helmholtz resonator that they use. That being said, we don't want to go into any math, do we? We want to stay away from that stuff. So here's an easy way to do it. We just pick one of our corners and we decide to fill it up. We're going to fill it up with wedges of 703 or of rock wool. How do we do that? Well, we just take one of our sheets and we cut it up into triangles. Then we stuff it in the corner and put a piece of fabric over it, and suddenly it looks great. And it's doing the job. And the thing about bass traps is, especially in a small room, which probably you're all dealing with, you can't do it wrong. You can't have too much of it. If you only do two of them, it's great. If you only do one, it's great. If you do all four corners there, it's great. You usually can't get enough of this, so you can't go wrong. So that's just an easy way to make it work. In terms of the front wall, that's one of the places we don't have to do much. If you're away from the front wall, like we talked about before, you're usually okay. If we want to go another step, we'll make the front wall soft. What do I mean by soft? We'll get acoustic panels, and we'll put the panels behind each speaker, and that will help. Once again, with acoustic panels, how many do we need? You usually can't go wrong in a small room. You don't want every surface to be an acoustic panel, but usually, at least if you have the RFZ, you're in good shape. You treat the back wall, you're in good shape. You want to add a few more. And again, if you're adding more, it can be pretty random. Doesn't matter where they're at. You might want to do some trial and error. Okay, that sounds good here. Let's move it a little bit. This stuff is not rocket science. All it takes is a little bit of experimentation. It's like when you're in the studio and you're working on a part, and you might have an idea for it, but it takes you a little time to work it out. It's exactly the same thing here, where there are certain principles that we know what to do, but even the best designers, you'd be shocked how much is experimentation at the end. You hire a real expensive designer to build a control room, and when he spends a week taking the console an inch, an inch, an inch, an inch, an inch, then you're going to say, well, wait a second, I could have done that and have to pay him. But that's exactly what happens. Or taking the speakers, okay, let's move it another inch, let's move it back an inch, okay, let's move it another inch that way. That's what ends up happening, because there's only so much that we can measure when it's all said and done. So, what are the things we learned? If you really want isolation, you need mass and you need an airspace. Can't get it any other way. If you can't give that, you're not going to get isolation. Doors and windows are fairly cheap to get some isolation out of. That being said, again, the big thing is if you have a thick, solid core door, it works best. We can't always afford that, $200 or $300. So most houses, for instance, have hollow core doors, but you still make it work. Keep the monitors away from the wall. Talked about that. If you have them too close to the wall, no good. Make sure that wherever our listening area is set up, it's equidistant from the side walls as much as you can. That'll help. Place your listening position lengthwise in the room. Decouple your monitors. Build an RFZ. And treat your back wall. Now, all of these things, again, it shouldn't cost you more than $150 US. Probably will be a lot less than that. It does not take a lot to do this. By the way, you should have access to the slides after this. So, all this stuff comes from this book that I wrote, Studio Builder's Handbook. It's all in there and a lot more. It can get very specific. If you want to fix your room, there's all the things we talked about and more. If you want to build like a real control room with control and glass and slanted and the whole deal, I'll show you how to do that. There's lots of construction tips. It's very low on math because once again, if you're going to get that deep into it, you should probably hire somebody. But in the meantime, there's so much that you can do yourself to get in the game. It doesn't cost a lot of money. So that's where this book is coming from for the most part. It goes over a lot of different things. The studio business. Again, my partner, Dennis Moody, my partner in this, he has owned a studio for a long time. He's also, it's interesting, he's the engineer to the drumming stars. Steve Gadd, Ricky Lawson, when he was alive, all those, hotshot drummers, when they're going to do their own albums, they hire him. Oh, back again. The other thing it does, there's a bunch of interviews that's really cool, especially the one I like is the one with one of the guys that, he's a bass player, but decided he was also a contractor. So he said, wait a second, I'm going to specialize in building studios. And most of the studios he builds are in people's houses and garages. So it's very cool to hear him talk about some of the things that he has to do to make them work, especially garages. So that was a good interview. I really liked that. We did this a few years ago, and DVDs are big, but most of the things that are on a DVD you can see online. Anyway, another thing, if you're not familiar with one of these other things I do, 101 Mixing Tricks. I have this course that's mixing tricks. It's everything on automation to punchy drums to interesting effects to compression, EQ. Not lessons, they're tricks. And these are tricks that I learned from some of the best mixers in the world. So if you want to check out a bunch of tricks, just go to 101 Mixing Tricks and you can check out a few of them. The one you might especially like is the Abbey Road reverb trick. And the reason why it's called that is because Abbey Road, they put these filters on their reverbs, going to the reverbs. And what that means is you can pour tons of that stuff on and it never sounds like it's too much. It always seems to work really well. So this is the way that you can do it yourself. That's one of the tricks anyway. This is how you get in touch with me. If you have any questions, you can reach out. I told you about videos, especially for making the acoustic panels. Go to my YouTube channel. It's Polymedia. should be Bobby Osinski, and actually I lost the password for it. I can't get it back, and they're not too helpful. But anyway, you might want to check out my podcast too every week. Some very interesting people, as well as the various blogs that I have. Every weekday, there's one on the music business, and there's one on music production. So you might want to check those out as well. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer about anything, honestly, about music business or production or the studio business or any of that stuff. I just wrote a book, just came out. It's the 4th edition. It's called Music 4.1, Survival Guide for making music in the Internet Age. And I started out Music 3.0, and it's 4.1 now. And what's interesting about that is I followed every 1,000th of a percent that came from Spotify and Pandora and YouTube, and tracked it all the way down to see where it was going, who was making all the money. And you'd be shocked because there's a lot of money being made. It's just not coming down to the players, the musicians, the artists, songwriters. There's lots of money being made in the business, though. So, any questions? No?
Out of curiosity,
Yeah.
how did you get your start in the business, especially here being in contact with the people you come into contact, developing your realm of knowledge of expertise? I've always been curious.
I started as a player. I was a guitar player and a keyboard player. I did that for a lot of my life, and I toured with a lot of people. I played in the studio, but I had always had studio chops as an engineer. And then when I didn't want to tour anymore, I had, with a big artist who shall remain nameless, I had a very bad tour. Mostly because of the artist not being in control of himself, let's say. And at the end, I said, no more, I'm done. So then I did 100% studio work as a producer, as an engineer. And I was a good engineer, but I wasn't a good mixer, which is the case for a lot of people, because mixing is hard, you know? But I knew all the greatest guys. I mean, I knew Elliot Scheiner, Al Schmidt, Ed Cherney, you know, the guys that have tons of platinum records. And I just thought, well, let me ask them. So I went and I started to talk to them, and I said, how? How do you do it? Give me your tricks. And that became my first book, The Mixing Engineer's Handbook. There's about 25 interviews in there. And first of all, it was just going to be background information, but then I realized, man, these are so interesting. I'm just going to put them in the book as well. And the book took off, much to my surprise. And then my publisher was on me for a second one. That became the Recording Engineer's Handbook. Prior to that, I was also writing, I should say. I was writing for like 10 different magazines. EQ, Billboard, Recording Engineer Producer when that was around. And the way that started was interesting. I was on a tour bus one day. The bass player comes on, and he says, I just got a job writing for the music paper. The music paper is a New York music rag. And I thought to myself, you know, if he could do it, I could do it too. So I started to call around, said, hey, I want to write an article. I want to write an article. And Mix magazine gave me my first break, writing something on Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. And I just dug that out not too long ago, and it was terrible. It was really bad. And thankfully, I got better since then. But I did about 1,000 interviews, a lot of articles. I was the speaker reviewer for EQ for about 5 years. So, you know, I went through all that, which that's interesting in itself, you know, how that works, how reviews work. But anyway, then I started to write books. And I still produce and mix. I've actually had 2 hits last year. One was #2 on the blues charts for a bit, and then I had a rock band hit #5 on the iTunes charts. So as a producer and a mixer, I still keep my hand in it a little bit anyway. So, but that's how it all started, really. I was a player and then kind of went into the studio